They didn't come to the hospital when I gave birth to my son, not because there was an emergency, not because they were sick. My in-laws missed the birth of their first grandchild because my sister-in-law had a bachelorette weekend in Whistler. And apparently, a spa and a wine tasting were more important than watching a new life come into this world. My husband, Daniel, was holding my hand in the delivery room at Vancouver General when his phone buzzed. I saw his face change. He read the message twice, put the phone face down on the table, and didn't say a word for a long moment. Then he looked at me and said, "They're not coming." I was 36 weeks along, already hooked up to monitors, already scared. I looked at him and said, "What do you mean they're not coming?" He said, "Natalie's thing is this weekend. Mom says she can't miss it. Dad went with her." I stared at the ceiling and said nothing. Our son Eli was born at 4:47 inches the morning on a Friday in October. Daniel cut the cord. My own mother, who had driven 4 hours from Kelowna the moment I called her, was in the waiting room. She was the first person outside of us to hold him. Daniel's parents sent a text that said, "Congratulations. Can't wait to meet him when we're back Monday XO." I saved that text. I saved every single thing after that. I need to go back a bit, because this didn't start in the delivery room. This started about 3 years before Eli was born, when Daniel and I got married. I was 28. Daniel was 31. We'd been together for 4 years, and from the very beginning I felt something off with his family. Nothing I could ever point to directly, nothing dramatic enough to say out loud. It was more like a temperature in the room. His mother, Patricia, was the kind of woman who smiled, while saying things that landed like small cuts. His father, Robert, was quieter, but he followed Patricia's lead on everything. Then there was Natalie. Natalie was 25, 2 years younger than Daniel, and had never fully accepted that her brother had a life that didn't orbit around her. When Daniel and I got engaged, she posted on Instagram before we even had a chance to call the family. When we picked our wedding venue, a beautiful property in the Okanagan, Natalie spent an entire dinner explaining why a venue in North Vancouver would have been more convenient. For whom, she never said. The wedding itself went fine. My mother-in-law cried at the ceremony, which I thought was genuine until she spent the reception pulling Daniel aside every 20 minutes to show him old family photos on her phone, as if reminding him of who he belonged to before me. After we got married, Daniel and I bought a condo in East Vancouver. We were happy. We were building something. And when we found out I was pregnant, we were thrilled. We told the families together over a Sunday dinner at Patricia and Robert's house in Burnaby. My parents came down from Kelowna for it. Patricia hugged me and said all the right things. Natalie said, "Oh, wow, already?" with a smile I didn't know how to read. On the drive home, Daniel asked me if I was okay. I told him I was fine. I was trying to be. The problems started small. Patricia began calling Daniel almost every day. Not to ask how I was doing, to talk about herself, about Natalie, about a renovation they were doing on the house, about nothing in particular. When I mentioned to Daniel that it was a lot, he said his mother had always been like that. I let it go. Then came the nursery. We had a second bedroom we were converting into a nursery. My mother offered to come help us paint and set up furniture. She's practical and good with her hands, and I genuinely wanted her there. When Patricia found out, she called Daniel and said she felt left out. Within the week, she had organized a nursery setup day and showed up with Robert, Natalie, and opinions about everything. She didn't like the color we'd chosen, a soft sage green I had spent weeks deciding on. She said it was a bit cold. She suggested we repaint it yellow. When I said we were keeping the green, she laughed and said, "Oh, you'll change your mind once baby's here." I didn't change my mind. But I also didn't say what I was thinking, which was that this was our home, our child, and our choice. I kept smiling. Daniel kept playing peacemaker. My mother, who had watched all of this quietly, pulled me aside while Patricia and Natalie were debating whether we needed a second change table, and said, "You know you're allowed to say something." I told her I was picking my battles. "You've been picking battles for 3 years," she said. "At some point, you run out of battles to save." Natalie announced her engagement 4 months into my pregnancy. Her fiancé, Tyler, was someone she'd been seeing for about 8 months. I liked Tyler fine, he was easygoing, and seemed genuinely fond of her. The engagement itself was lovely, we were all happy for them. The problem came 3 weeks later, when Natalie announced the Bachelorette weekend. She had chosen the last weekend of October. She had chosen it, she said, because October is beautiful in Whistler. She had booked the Fairmont Chateau Whistler for a long weekend Friday to Sunday, and had invited 11 of her friends and her mother. The email she sent out to the group included a detailed itinerary: a spa day, a private wine tasting at a local winery, a group dinner, and a Sunday morning hike. My due date was October 24th. When Daniel pointed this out to his mother carefully, gently, the way he always did things with her, Patricia said, "Well, first babies are almost never on time. You'll probably go late." He told her that wasn't the point. The point was that if I went into labor that weekend, neither of them would be there. She said, "Daniel, Natalie has been planning this for weeks. We can't just pull out now. The hotel is non-refundable." He said, "Mom, we're having a baby." She said, "And Natalie is getting married. These are both important." I was sitting at our kitchen table when Daniel came and told me what she'd said. I looked at him for a moment and then asked, very calmly, "So what are you going to do?" He said, "I don't know yet." I said, "Okay." And then I got up, went to the bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. That night, I called my mother. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Do you want me to be there?" I said, "Yes, please." She booked her train ticket the next morning. I went into labor at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, 10 days early. Daniel called his parents immediately. His mother didn't pick up. He left a voicemail. He texted. He called his father. Robert picked up, sounded half asleep, and said he'd let Patricia know. They were already in Whistler. Natalie's Bachelorette weekend had started that afternoon. I know what you might be thinking. Maybe they couldn't have known I'd go into labor a week and a half early. Maybe this was genuinely unavoidable. I've thought about this too. I've been fair to this version of events. But here's what I know. Daniel had asked them, plainly and directly, 2 weeks before the Bachelorette weekend, to make a plan. He'd said, "Can you be reachable? Can one of you stay closer to Vancouver, just in case?" He had not asked them to cancel anything. He had not made demands. He had asked for a plan. Patricia had said, "We'll figure it out if it comes to that." It came to that, and they figured out that Whistler was more important. My mother arrived at the hospital at 1 a.m. She held my hand through contractions while Daniel timed them. She brought me ice chips and talked to me about nothing about her garden, about a show she'd been watching, about the drive down, and it kept me calm in a way I can't fully explain. At 4:47 inches the morning, Eli came into the world. He was 6 pounds 11 ounces. He had Daniel's nose and my mother's stubbornness, which I recognized immediately. He screamed exactly once, and then looked around the room like he was assessing it. I cried. Daniel cried. My mother cried. Patricia and Robert sent a text at 2 a.m. They came on Monday, as promised. I want to be honest about this. They walked through the door of our condo, and Patricia started crying the moment she saw Eli. That part was real. I could see it was real. She held him, and she wept. And she said he was perfect, and I believe she meant it. But then, within the same hour, she said, "I just wish I could have been there for the birth. I'm so sad I missed it." I looked at her. I looked at my husband. I said nothing. She said it like something had happened to her, like the birth had occurred without her, through some unfortunate circumstance beyond anyone's control. She did not say, "I'm sorry I wasn't there." She said, "I'm sad I missed it." There is a difference. Natalie came with Tyler the following weekend. She cooed over Eli and took about 40 photos. Before she left, she mentioned that she and Tyler were thinking about setting a wedding date for the following September and hoped that would work for everyone. I said, "Congratulations. What a fun time of year." She smiled. I smiled. Daniel smiled. I was keeping score now. Not out of pettiness, I want to be clear about that. I was keeping score because I had started to understand that no one else was, and that if I didn't, nothing would ever change. The wedding planning began in January. I was 3 months postpartum, still exhausted, still breastfeeding, still learning what kind of person I was going to be as a mother. Natalie came over one Sunday with a binder. An actual binder, tabbed and color-coded, full of venue brochures, catering menus, and magazine clippings. She wanted to talk about her dress. She wanted to talk about the florist. She wanted to talk about whether Daniel would be willing to plan the rehearsal dinner, since he was the brother of the bride. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask how Eli was sleeping. She sat at my kitchen table for 2.5 hours and talked about her wedding, and Patricia sat across from me nodding along. And at no point did either of them turn the conversation toward the infant I was raising in the next room. My mother called that evening. I told her about the visit. She was quiet, then said, "You know you don't have to keep doing this." Doing what? Performing fine. I thought about that for a long time. The breaking point came in March. We had been invited to a family dinner at Patricia and Robert's house. A regular Sunday dinner, nothing special. Eli was 5 months old. Getting out of the house with a 5-month-old is a production. The bag, the spare clothes, the timing around naps and feeds. We had done all of it. We arrived on time. Natalie arrived 40 minutes late with a new friend from work. Patricia immediately shifted all of her attention to the friend, offering the grand tour, pulling out the good wine. Dinner was served late because of the delay. Eli, who had been perfect for the first hour, was now exhausted and starting to fuss. I asked Patricia quietly if I could use one of the back bedrooms to nurse him and get him down for a nap. She said, "Oh, can't you just do it out here? We're all family." I said, "I'd rather somewhere quiet. He needs to sleep." She made a face just briefly and said, "I suppose." I took Eli to the guest room. I sat on the bed and nursed him in the dark, and I thought about every single moment that had accumulated to this one. The nursery day, the Bachelorette weekend, the text at 8 a.m., the Sunday visit, and now this. A face and, I suppose. I thought about what my mother had said, about performing fine, about running out of battles. When Eli fell asleep, I laid him carefully on the bed, surrounded by pillows, and I went back to the dinner table. And for the first time in 3 years of marriage, when Patricia asked me a question about our summer plans specifically, whether we'd be available for a family cottage weekend she was organizing, I said, very calmly, "I'm not sure yet. We're going to start being a lot more selective about how we spend Eli's early months." The table went quiet. Daniel looked at me. I held Patricia's gaze. She said, "That's a strange thing to say." I said, "I don't think it is." And that was how it started. Daniel and I talked that night for a long time. I told him everything I'd been holding, all of it, from the Instagram announcement to the nursery, from the Whistler weekend to the 8 a.m. text, from the Sunday visit to the guest room. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. And then he said, "I think I've been making excuses." I said, "I know." He said, "I didn't want to see it." I said, "I know that too." We didn't come up with a plan that night, but something shifted. I felt it. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began setting limits with his family. He stopped answering his mother's daily calls. He started responding to texts on his own schedule instead of immediately. When Natalie called to ask if we could host a family dinner so she could show everyone her wedding dress photos, he said, "We're pretty tied up right now. We'll figure out another time." The response from Patricia was swift. She called Daniel 3 times in one day. She sent a long text saying she felt like she was losing her son. She told Robert, who called Daniel to say that his mother was upset and could he please just call her back. Daniel did call her back. He told her, with me sitting next to him, that we loved her and wanted to be close with the family, but that we needed to feel like our family, our home, our son, our choices were being respected. He said it calmly and clearly. He said it without an apology. She cried. She said she didn't understand what she'd done wrong. She said she had always tried her best. He said, "I know, Mom. This isn't about assigning blame. It's about what we need going forward." She hung up shortly after. Things were cold for about 6 weeks. During that time, Natalie's wedding planning continued full speed. We received a formal invitation in the mail, beautiful cardstock, our names printed correctly, a September date. We RSVP'd yes. I bought a dress. We arranged childcare for Eli. We were going to be there. I want to be clear about that. But the relationship had changed. Patricia had stopped including me in the group texts about wedding details. When she called Daniel now, it was briefer, more careful. I wasn't sure if that was progress or just strategy. What happened next, I didn't expect. In June, Daniel received an email. It was from his parents' financial advisor, forwarded by mistake to Daniel's old family email address, which his parents had forgotten he still accessed. The email contained a summary of a meeting Patricia and Robert had held that spring, and in it was a line item I had to read 3 times before I understood it. Patricia and Robert had updated their estate documents. They had established an education trust for future grandchildren standard enough, but the trust had been structured so that distributions would require co-sign approval from Natalie, who had been named co-trustee. Not Daniel. Not Daniel and Natalie equally, just Natalie, which meant that any money set aside for Eli's education for our son would require Natalie's approval to access. I sat with that for 2 days before I told Daniel. He read the email, he read it again, he closed the laptop and went for a walk. He was gone for an hour. When he came back, he sat down across from me and said, "We need to talk to a lawyer." We contacted a family law and estate attorney in Vancouver. She reviewed what Daniel had found and explained that while the trust was technically legal, the structure was unusual and could create significant complications, not just logistically, but legally, if Natalie ever had a dispute with us, or if her own financial circumstances changed, or if she simply chose to withhold approval out of spite. The lawyer wrote a formal letter to Patricia and Robert's estate attorney, outlining our concerns and requesting that the trust be restructured, to remove the co-trustee requirement or replace it with an independent trustee. Patricia called Daniel the day the letter was received. She was not calm this time. She said Daniel had gone behind their backs. She said we had no right to interfere in their estate planning. She said this was a gift they were choosing to give, and gifts came with their terms, she said. And this is the part I keep coming back to. I thought you trusted us. Daniel said, "We're asking you to trust us too." She said, "This is Natalie's influence, isn't it? Did she put you up to this?" He said, "Mom, stop." There was a pause. Then she said, "If you push this, Daniel, there will be consequences." He said, very quietly, "I know. We've thought about that." The mediation happened in August, 6 weeks before Natalie's wedding. I want to give credit where it's due. Robert was the one who suggested mediation, rather than letting it go further. He called Daniel privately and said he thought Patricia had gone too far and that he wanted to find a resolution. I don't know what was said between the two of them, and I've chosen not to ask. The mediator was a calm, precise woman who had done this kind of thing for 30 years. We sat in a boardroom in downtown Vancouver, Daniel and I on one side, Patricia and Robert on the other, with the estate attorney and the mediator at the ends. Patricia spent the first 20 minutes explaining how much she had given to Daniel over the years. The mediator let her finish. Then she turned to us and asked us to explain our concern clearly, without reference to past grievances. Daniel spoke. He was steady and clear. He said we had no objection to the trust itself, only to the structure that placed Natalie in a position of unilateral authority over funds intended for our child. Robert said, almost immediately, "That's fair." Patricia looked at him. He said, "Patricia, that's fair." There was a long silence. The trust was restructured by the end of the session. Natalie was replaced as co-trustee by an independent professional. The funds, approximately $80,000, intended for Eli's education, would now be accessible to our family, without requiring approval from anyone with a personal stake. On the way out, Robert held the door for me. He said quietly, "I'm sorry it got this far." I said, "Thank you for saying that." Patricia said nothing to me, but she hugged Daniel in the lobby, briefly, and I saw that her eyes were wet. I did not feel triumphant. I felt very tired, and also very certain that we had done the right thing. Natalie's wedding was in September, on a genuinely beautiful day on a property in the South Okanagan. The vines were turning gold. Tyler cried when he saw her come down the aisle. She was radiant. I mean that. Daniel gave a speech at the reception. He talked about watching his sister grow up, about how stubborn and funny and loyal she had always been, about how glad he was to welcome Tyler to the family. He was warm and funny, and the room loved him. He did not mention any of what had happened. He did not need to. Near the end of the evening, Natalie found me at our table while Daniel was dancing with his father. She sat down and looked at her hands for a moment, and then she said, "I know things have been hard. I don't think I handled a lot of it well." I said, "I appreciate you saying that." She said, "I didn't realize how much I expected Daniel to always just be there, without asking what he needed." I said, "I think that's a hard thing to see when you're inside it." She looked at me. "Are we okay?" I said, "We're working on it." She nodded. That was enough for both of us. Eli turned 1 in October. We had a small party at our condo, my parents, Daniel's parents, a few close friends. Patricia brought him a hand-knitted blanket in dark blue that she had made herself. It was beautiful, and it took months of work, and I could see what it meant. I thanked her. I meant it. Things are not the same as they were before all of this. I don't think they will be. Some things, once seen, can't be unseen, but there is something different in the room now, something more honest, more careful. Patricia no longer arrives with instructions. She asks before she gives opinions. Robert has started texting Daniel directly, not through his mother, and the conversations are warmer than they've ever been. Natalie sent me a photo last week of Tyler holding Eli at a family dinner. She added a caption that said he's the best, honestly. I saved it, not as evidence this time just because I wanted to. I'm not interested in performing fine anymore. I'm interested in the real thing, even when it's slower and harder and less comfortable than I expected. What I've learned is that you can love someone and still require them to treat you with respect. That those two things are not in conflict. That the moment you stop pretending they are, is the moment things can actually begin to change. Eli is asleep in his sage green nursery right now as I'm writing this. Daniel is in the kitchen making tea. My mother called earlier, and I let it ring through, so I could call her back when I had more time. Because I know she's always there, and that is one of the great certainties of my life. I didn't beg his family to do better. I didn't cry in their living room and ask them to love me correctly. I just stopped accepting less than what our family deserved, and I let everything that followed come from that one clear decision. It turns out that was enough.